Hi everyone, my name is Hannah Collison from Inspired Creations. Lovely to see you again. Today we're going to do a tutorial on making a large peony. This is the project you're going to make. We're going to make one of these flowers and a couple of leaves to go with. It's good fun, and if you'd like to work alongside, here is the kit list. So here we go. So rolling the paste out, I've just pressed the record button. Rolling the paste out. Now we want it nice and thin. Okay, it needs to be as thin as the crispy aromatic duck pancakes. Phyllo pastry, that's what we want. Something that you can start to see the colour of the board come through. It wants to be super thin. Otherwise, it doesn't come out as nice. The petals won't look as delicate. So it should feel nice and loose and thin. Once you've rolled your paste out, you want to turn it over. Oops. The reason you turn it over is because you've been rolling out on one side, so that's become a little bit dry, which is great because now with a bit of corn flour on the dry side, so I've turned the paste over so the dry side is face down, it means that this will move around the board, because the worst thing you can do is actually try and cut your shape with this stuck on it. When you try and cut with the cutter, you need to be able to move freely around the board, and if you can't, then your shape will be distorted. So press down. Give it a good old rub in the areas where you think maybe it hasn't cut. Once you think it's cut through, pull the excess paste around, and this will squeeze up and pop in a bag because we can use it all again. And if your cutter sticks in the, if your shape stays in the cutter, then you can actually turn around and take advantage of that and use your finger to rub around. It's quite a big shape, so it's more likely to drop out. But if you get that chance to rub around the edge, it'll take the furry edge off. If you have a furry edge and you're not happy with it, then you can just trim it with the cutting wheel. Okay. Now, with this, the only difference between the all-in-one cutter and the separate cutters is that you get 5 shapes in one go. So if you've got the individual ones, you want to cut 5 shapes. Here I've got a little dot in the middle to indicate the center, and I am actually now going to separate these petals. And the reason for that is because they attach to the ball much more neatly if you have them separated. Once you've separated them, if you've got this tool here, which is the silk veining tool, you can texture them. Actually, I'm gonna actually change my suggestion here. I'm going to show you the cutting part, because with these you can do all 3 techniques, or you could just pick 1 or 2 of them. It depends how much time you want to spend on making your peony. So I'm showing it with the 3 techniques, but you can omit some of them. So the first step that I like to do is cut some random snips in, not too close together, with a pair of scissors. Okay, you could, if you wanted to, use your cutting wheel. If you use the small end of the cutting wheel, press down quite firmly as you're cutting through. Okay, so 3 or 4, you don't need many, and they don't want to be very close together. You want them a little bit random looking. So cutting through. So scissors if you haven't got the cutting wheel. Okay, so just something like that. And then while they're on your board, making sure that they're not sticking. If you want, and this is optional, you can take your silk veining tool, or if you haven't got one of those, you can use a cocktail stick. Okay, and the idea here is to put this onto the top edge of that shape and roll across. So you're kind of placing the tool. I can then leave it hands free if I want to, although I do like to hold on to my tool, and then just run it across, and that will give you some texture to the flower petal, and it just makes it super thin for the next bit. But if you haven't got one of those tools, if you cut the end, the spiky end off of the cocktail stick, so you've only got a little bit of the tapered part, if you drop that onto there with a little bit of corn flour, you will be able to do the same. Okay, so just drop it on there, and then just have your hand your writing hand is just kind of stopping the cocktail stick from spinning, and it's your non-dominant hand that's pressing down. Okay, so I'll just quickly do that all the way across. But this is the bit if you're running short of time, or this is for an order and they haven't got a big budget, then you don't have to do this part. It's all optional. You could, if you had a poppy veiner, you could actually vein them as well, but we don't need to do that. Poppy veiner would negate the need to do this bit. Okay, and then the last one, again, checking it's not sticking. Try and keep in line with the top edge here. Oops, moving around a bit. Okay, so now I've got a little bit, I've got a shredded edge and a frilly edge, but we're not quite finished yet. So I'm just now going to put these onto my foam pad. If you haven't got a foam pad, you can actually use the palm of your hand to do this. We did have a lady yesterday who had minimal tools and she didn't have a foam pad. They're very useful. They're only a few pounds and they're well worth investing in because you'll use it all the time with flowers. So with the foam pad, I'm going to use the fat end of my veining tool now. Okay, so I've got this bit here. And I'm not going to have it flat. I want to hold it on its side so that I can draw the tool from off the tip of the paste onto the paste and through and down the paste. And by being off the tip here, so you're pressing initially on a bit of the foam pad, when you then draw through, it kind of cups and curls it. So those extra snips that you've put in are giving you that extra frilliness. Okay. Now, if you wanted to bypass all these processes, you could go from rolled out, cut, separated petals straight into this. And the only difference is it won't look as fine and realistic. Okay, so you can bypass all of these techniques except for this one. So now we've got this really nice, frilly curled up, lovely cut edge. So I'm just going to finish off these ones. Just be careful if you're working anywhere near the holes on the foam pad, if yours has got holes, that you don't slip down them because it's very easily done, and that can ruin your petals. So that's my last one. Nearly time for you to have a go. I'm just going to talk you through how to attach these on. So I've got my 2 centimeter diameter ball here, which is the one I had on the list, 20 mil. But if you wanted, you could actually work with a larger one. So if you've got a larger ball, it's okay. When you put the shapes on, you will find that there is white showing at the bottom here. But that's not to be concerned about, because as you build up the petal layers and go up the petal sizes, eventually you will find this whole ball is covered. So you can work with a small ball or a large ball. If you work with a large ball, you get a bigger peony center and it builds larger quicker as well. Okay, so I've got my sugar glue. I'm just going to put some glue from where I've started my frill. So it's probably 2/3 of the way up and then down the middle, well, actually the whole thing. So the whole of this area is painted. When you come to the bigger petals that we set on spoons, the gluing is different. But for all the gluing, when you're attaching the petals to the center directly without setting them on spoons, it's always going to be 3/4 of the way up. If you're gluing less than that, they start to peel back on themselves. And you want these to look quite, tightly packed. Now, I've got a dummy little piece of Oasis, or you can use, I'm just going to pull this one out so you can see it, because we want that to help us stabilize the flower as it grows. And we're not going to push this in directly, but of course you can see that my kebab stick is actually way too long for the piece of dummy that I've got here. Now, you want to keep a long enough stem so that it pushes into your cake because this is food safe. It can go directly into your cake. So when you're making these, if you have a slightly thicker piece of Oasis or dummy, cake dummy, then you'll have a longer stick, which is probably a bit more logical because you'll be able to push it more further into the cake. So here I'm just going to measure that roughly, and I need to trim just with the pair of wire cutters. If you're anywhere near someone, just make sure that it doesn't ping off. So I've now got just a shorter stem which will fit nicely into here. Don't need this bit yet. Okay, so you'll also notice that I accidentally went through the top with my stick when I was trying to glue it with PVA, and that's all right as well because this now is going to disappear. So we take our first shape and put it over the top so it just goes over halfway. Press it on the sides a little bit, and then this little tail here, I'm going to pinch it. Okay, and there's a reason for that, I'll tell you in a minute. So then we take our next petal, and this one's going to go directly opposite. It's going to overlap this first petal that we've just attached, and it's almost like you've got your hands and you're resting your hand, the tips of your fingers are just resting over each other like a bulb, like that. Okay, so that's effectively what this is doing. The fingers of the petal are resting on top of the first one. So then we go ahead and pinch this side here. The reason I do that, because if your petal's particularly large, when you try and press it on, you might end up with like a raised little wing part here. And if that won't settle neatly, then you need to know that you can actually, if it won't settle like that, you can actually trim them. So if your ball is small and your first cutter size is big, you can simply cut off the corner at the bottom. And what that will do is help you create a cup in the petal, and it means that it's going to sit on there neatly. So if it fits, you don't need to trim, you just need to press it down. If it doesn't fit, then you can trim, and it gives you a small seam which won't show once we've finished. So that's the two first petals, and then I'll just show you these last three and then I'll let you have a go. So this one here, the third petal is going to come slightly lower than the two in the middle, because when you look at a peony, you can see the center too. And then there's a drop down, a little bit of a drop down, and that's where your next layer of petals starts. And after that, every single extra petal, whatever size, is lined up with this level so that you become wider rather than lower. Okay, so this one I'm just going to pinch here. Have a look, because you just want to evenly space these three. So that's my second one going on. Pinch it at the bottom. And then the third one going on. So the aim is to completely disguise the polystyrene ball inside. The reason you've got a ball in there is it's nice and light, but you could make it out of sugar if you wanted to, or you could actually scrunch up some foil to the right size and glue that on with PVA if you can't get hold of the poly balls. They're food safe, and it's unlikely someone will eat this, so it is fine now. Nowadays, it's quite normal to have something like polystyrene in there. So I'm just going to take my scissors, and those areas that I've pinched, I'm just going to cut off. Okay. Now, once you've done this, and I'll give you some time now, but if you're suddenly speeding along, the next step would be to take your leftover pink paste, add a bit of white to it, and then roll and cut exactly the same shape again. So you're still working on the small, and we're going to do 3 lots of 5 layers. So if you're working on individual petals, you add your little bit of white to pale the paste, roll out thin and cut 5 further petals, and then you can add a bit more white and roll out and cut a further 5 petals. So in effect, I'm going to be asking you to roll 2 more shapes, paler shades. Okay. So have a go as well. So I've prepared my second same size shape. So this is the small petal cutter, 5 petals, prepared in exactly the same way as before. And I'm going to glue them in exactly the same way as before. So 2/3 of the way up. Glue them all. You may as well glue them all. What will happen then is the first one you glued will have an opportunity to just soak in a little bit, and that'll make it a little bit tacky. So there's no problem with a bit of time delay. You've probably got about 3 or 4 minutes before the glue starts to become less sticky. So this outer petal layer now is going to line up with the petal, the three final petals you stuck on. Okay, so everything now is going to be at this level. Nothing's going to necessarily come up, it's all just going to come out. The other thing to remember is that you want to stagger the petals like brickwork. So where this edge of one of the petals that we had already stuck on, that's actually going to line up with the center of the new petal. So we have in-betweens. So I'm going to start there. New petal lines up, center of the joins on the old petal that you've put on already. Making sure that this height is the same. And then here you can see this is where this pinching idea comes in, because the tail of the petal now is drooping as you've lowered it. Now, try not to press too much in the middle or on the top. Keep this so that it's fairly gappy, because it builds the peony quicker and it gives it a lot of interest. So here I can then just snip that, and that will help me shape the petal. Okay, and it takes off the excess. I've got a little snip in there. You don't have to snip as you attach. You could actually put them all on. So I'll show you what I mean. This is all 4. Pinch at the bottom. Next one, overlapping slightly as you go, keeping the height the same as the layer before. So we're not trying to close it up at all. And then the last 2. So all of these were fairly equally spaced, so that we've got, you know, we're still kind of rounded on our ball shape. Gentle press. Try not to prod it, try not to push this in here, because you want to keep this bulbous. If you press a lot down here, you'll end up with like an angle to it. Okay, so I can pull these out a little bit just to open them up to give some interest, like so. And at the back, I've got all these pinched parts. So now I've pinched them all. So you can cut them individually, or you can just go around now and cut them all off. It depends what you find easier and what's more time efficient at the end of the day. Okay, so we've got this look at the back. You might, if you've got a bigger ball, you might be seeing more white. That's okay. And that's the front. So after that, the next step would be to add some white to your leftover pink paste, or whichever colour you're using, and cut a further small petal shape and prepare in the same way. So you've got 3 layers, paling as you go, same size cutter. If your ball is quite big and you feel like you should progress up to the next size, then you can go ahead and do so. It's really a judgment call on how big the centre of your ball is and when you feel you want to go up in size. So I'm going to do that while you're having a go. So this is still the same size cutter, the smallest one, and I've separated the petals and made 5, created in exactly the same way, and we're going to add these on. So the glue, the process is what you've just done, so I'll just show it, kind of reconfirming. The glue is 2/3 of the way up each of the petals. Glue them all and then go back to the first set. And then as a guide for the first one, you just find a petal edge, and the petal edge is going to go in the center of the fresh petal you're adding. And the key here is to try and keep the height the same. Okay, so you can see now by adding this, it's starting to fatten, broaden, whatever you want to call it. So I'm just pinching this a little bit here, just to cup it a little bit, and there'll be a little bit of trimming. But you'll notice as you add these, you want to overlap them slightly, but maybe not as much, because you've got 5 and your center is building in size, and it's probably quite clear now that the next one needs to be the next size up. Okay, so just partially overlap so they're equally spaced around the flower center. Just make sure that they're not dropping down. You do want to keep that height, so if it's going to open up a little bit, perhaps you need to make sure that it's slightly higher in the first place. So these are just going to curl in. Hold the glued area for a few seconds so that it stays on. At this point as well, it will start to peel back on itself. So this is where I'm going to show you how to create the supports to hold it temporarily until you're ready to put the next layer on. But you can see it's so much better when the petals start to open. This last one is actually going to overlap the petal number 4 and overlap the first petal on that layer. Okay, and then you can start to open this up. Just make sure the top is curling over. Okay, curling over just a little bit. All right, so you can see it starting to open. Now I'll just turn that upside down. If you've only just glued the ball on though, be careful because you don't want it to drop off. And with a gentle snip, I'm just going to cut off where I think I've got excess, which actually now isn't much because the petal is actually pretty much the right size for the center. Okay, so that's my back, side, front. Now, I'm just going to drop that in there for a moment. What I do need to do though is pre-drill a hole into my oasis or whatever you're going to use as your support. The reason you do that is because you want this hole to be loose so you can actually get your flower out ready to put onto your cake. Take your cocktail stick and push that through and use a pair of tweezers just to get that so that it sits with maybe 3 mil of the stick showing. Okay, and that's so you can get your fingers underneath there. So of course if I left this and it was a very wet day, it's just going to open up quite a bit. You might quite like this, but in a minute that's going to be down here falling over. So to help me with that, what I've done is taken a bit of kitchen roll, just lengthways. I'll demonstrate that for you. Just grab my kitchen roll. So I've just got a sheet of kitchen roll. You might need a couple. Start to roll that up. Okay, nice and tight, give it a good fold in between. And then you take your scissors and you cut. Okay, probably 5-6 centimeter lengths. You might get 3, perhaps 4 out of one strip, depending on how big your kitchen towel is. Can you see how it's dropped? Yeah, you can see how it's dropping. So what you would do with the kitchen towel is take it, fold it, give it a press at the fold, and now I've got something that's a little bit springy, and I can pop that underneath those petals. I don't have to push it right in because I do want some form of opening, but I just want it to bring those petals back into place. When we put the outer petals on, we'll be removing these temporarily and then dropping them back. And once we've got to the point where we've got all the petal layers on, we can adjust and take away some of the tension if we feel like it's closing the petal up too much. Can you see how that's just making it close in? All right. And I would say if you're making flowers that haven't got wires in them, that you need to have a decent form of support to hold these petal shapes even once it's made, until you're ready to put it on the cake. And then I'd be very tempted still, once you've assembled this on the cake, to actually put the supports in to the gaps and transport it like that and present it like that and tell the customer or your friend, whoever it is you're giving it to remove the supports at the last minute. Because if you get a damp day, they will droop. And that's happened to me where I've had a friend who I made peonies with for her wedding, and she was half cut already because she'd been on the ferry to go and do a wine run, but she came in the evening with a bottle of wine, and between us we finished the wine and we finished 2 peonies, and that was a few weeks before her wedding. And I just for some reason thought I'll just check those peonies. I opened the box, and because I hadn't put these supports in, the whole lot had collapsed and I couldn't fix it, so I had to remake them. Okay, so it's a good idea to always have your supports in. Once this is dry, we could actually replace these with a cocktail stick, and then that, if it is going to fall back, it's just going to fall back onto the stick. Okay, but for the moment we just want little strips of folded kitchen towel. If they're too springy, just unwind them a little bit and take a bit of the volume out of the tissue. Okay, so that's now holding. After that one, so that's our 3 smallest layers, you're going to create 2 of the medium size, but those we're going to prepare in the same way. I'm going to set them on spoons, so that's what I'm going to do now. So this is the medium-sized cutter, and I've got some spoons here. These are kind of dessert spoon size. You can actually get, for the bigger ones, you could use tablespoons instead of dessert spoons, so they'll be a little bit larger. So I've got to make sure that they don't stick, so I'm putting a bit of corn flour on here. Metal ones are fine, and I haven't put any glue on here at the moment. I've just prepared these petals in exactly the same way. Press so that the bottom half, this pointy bit here, must be flat in the spoon, okay? Because what we're trying to do is achieve a cupped effect, but we don't want ripples on here because that's the only section that's going to make contact with the flour. And if this rippled in any way, then it's got a very minimal sticking ability. And then I'm just going to curl up the top end so that it's just going to sit nicely in the flour. So if I turn that on a profile, yeah. So you've got this lovely cup finish, and these are, once you've created these, I would carefully, if you're going down flights of stairs, pop these in the oven, turn your oven off, but keep the door shut, and that will help them dry out a little bit. Now what we're after is something that normally would take about 20 minutes to dry, and then you'd have a bit of flexibility, so it might just move a little bit for you. It's not completely crisp hard, and then we can attach them. Okay, so then if you decide you want to make all these overnight and then come back to them in the morning, then you would need a steamer to loosen them off a fraction, so you could actually stick them on. So this is my medium sized, and I've got, I can judge it then. If I wanted to, I could actually go up a size again and make another set of petals, which would be another layer. So depending on how quickly you're working, if you're nearly at this stage, you could do another set of 5 paler paste. You decide if you want to go up in size or not. And then it's literally everything from this stage on, as you get bigger in the petals, everything's set on spoons. Okay, we wouldn't just try and stick it onto the actual piece, and the reason for that is because you want to keep this cup, but also it's very difficult for it to hold on now without flopping backwards. Okay, so I'm going to put these into the dehydrator, and I'm going to make one size up larger so that I've got 10 petals to show you how to attach. And once yours are in the oven, that's when I'm going to show you the leaf, and then hopefully in the time it takes you to make your leaf, towards the end of the class, about 11:45ish, we'll start to stick on. Okay, so I'm just going to mute. Well, so when we've made enough petals to stick on the flower, that can be set and dried and actually have the supports underneath. But if you make maybe 5 or 6 extra petals, spare ones, when you come to assemble it on the cake, you can push your flower onto the cake. You know, push the kebab stick through into the cake, and then depending on how that positions, you'll probably find that you'll see stick or ugly side of flour on when you look at the cake from the side. So your extra spare petals that you make would be how you fill in the gaps. Okay, so I would just make up a little gunge using sugar flour paste that you've made, so the spare sugar flour paste, mix with some sugar glue, just a little bit, and get it to a paste consistency that you can spread on with a brush, and you just put a bit of that onto the front bottom of the petal, possibly a little bit on the back if it's going to make contact with the cake or one of the leaves, and then that would be pushed in behind, and you would build up the final size of your peony on the cake. So with this one here, I would probably have only made it to this size, and then these petals here would have been put on once it was on the cake, just to make it look really assembled and natural. The same here as well. These ones would have been pre-made and dried and then added in last thing. The leaves as well are made and dried and added in after you've finished and assembled and added any spare petals to your flower. Okay. Okay, so I've actually gone up to a larger size to do these. It's a final 5, so I'll have then 10 on petals, and I'm using a slightly larger plastic spoon, prepared in the same way. So all I did with these leaves is I had a look at my peony plant in the garden, and I just wanted something really rough, not too exacting. Okay, and the leaves are great as a background for this. So if I bring the picture back in, you can see that they're positioned in. Now, once you put your flower in, you would secure your flower with a little bit of let down sugar flower paste color that you're using and some glue. Then you stick in your extra petals, and then you secure your leaves. Okay, it's actually easier to slot those in behind. You could have your main flower not quite pushed in completely, and then just be really careful when you push it in finally, that you don't crack the leaves. So you can see that they're kind of suspended over the edge, but it really does make a difference to the arrangement to have the foliage. Okay, so that's what we're going to do. I've got a piece of foil here, and all I've done is taken my fingers onto the foil and scrunch it up. And that's what I'm going to set my leaf on, and it'll hold the shape. So that's what your foil's for. And with my paste, I'm just going to roll it out nice and thin as before. So if you're at this point, you're welcome to join me and do this at the same time. If not, you will have a short amount of time after. I'm just going to do a quick leaf. They're not too difficult to do. So nice and thin, like you did for the peony. Turn it over. Actually, that's not thin enough. I'll just give it another roll. Put some corn flour on the surface so it's not sticking. Bit on the top as well. If you're using a cereal packet as your template, you want to put the shiny cardboard side down onto the paste, because the rough cardboard will stick. And then I'm going to use my cutting wheel to cut around the edge. Now, if you notice, I've got my cutting wheel tilted towards the outside, so it's not upright like this. I'm actually tilting it to the side. And when you do that, you get a cleaner cut, because it kind of cuts underneath. When you come to these smaller parts, transfer onto the smaller wheel, and it's easier to start in the corner part and draw outwards. Okay, so draw all the way around, quite a firm press, so you know you've cut through. You could use a craft knife, but you want to be on a mat that doesn't matter if you score it. Okay, and then if you give a little flick of a rip to get the excess from around, just use the tip of your cutting wheel. You could use a pair of scissors for this to release the shape, and then you can go ahead and pop that shape onto your foam pad, avoiding the holes. Now, a couple of things we do. Go back to your veining tool that you've been using, hold it sideways in exactly the same way, start off the pointy edge here and draw a central vein. Then come to the tip here and do the same in kind of a curved shape. Okay, turn the angle of your tool the other way to do the other side. Okay, so now we've got some vein lines. If you want to, you can put a couple more in. Just don't overdo it, because we're not trying to do anything too precise. Now, the last process is using my bone modeling tool, or you can use a ball tool depending on which tool you've got. I find it easier to use the large end of my bone modeling tool, because I think this is too big. Okay. And here, I'm just going to run my tool from the edge, pinching, so half on, half off. You don't want to be right on the paste, because it's going to give you a cup. And if your paste is too thick, it will give you a cup anyway. But all we're trying to do is draw and thin, just slightly. I don't want to make it too roughly, because I haven't got a huge amount of texture or movement. Come from the crease out, yeah? crease out. I feel like I want to just do a bit more. That's too roughly. Okay, so now I've got this movement to my leaf. Take hold of the leaf shape and just fold it a little bit in the center. You can shape the bottom and the top, the tip. And then you take your scrunched up foil and find a position that you like on there. Just something that makes it look a little bit natural, not too turned over, because remember, you've got to stick it on a cake. Okay, and once it's dry, you could store these in a box quite comfortably. In fact, I would probably store them on the foil. You could have a couple of layers, one on top of the other, tissue in between, and they would store for quite a while. Okay, and you could dust those. You could use a little bit of moss green or eucalyptus in the center if you wanted to dust them before they go on. Sometimes it's nice to catch the edges with a bit of green, bit of red, or make them look a little bit autumnal. Okay, so that's your leaf. Have a go at that, and in the meantime, I'm going to retrieve my petals to show you how to stick them on, and then it's your turn to maybe at least give one petal set a go attaching. And if you've got to go, I appreciate some of you have got jobs and what have you to go to. So if you don't get to stick the petals on just now, you can leave them on the side, take them out of the oven, leave them on the side. And then if they're a little bit too brittle, you can just waft them maybe about this far away from your kettle to soften them enough to be able to attach them when you've got the time. So I've got, these have been drying for about 10 minutes or so. They're quite brittle. The ones I only just put in, there is a little bit of movement. That's what you want, just a little bit of movement, but fairly set, so it's going to hold its cup shape. You can imagine these would look quite nice if they were just scattered loosely on the bottom of the wedding cake as well, as if it's a fallen petal. Quite nice. So what I'm going to do, very brief, I'm going to make this a quick demo so that you have time to finish. I'm just going to draw some glue in the flat part. So basically it's from about here down to the tip and up to where the petal edge starts again. Okay, so it's a V shape. We don't colour glue in the middle, so there's no glue in the centre of these. That's where it's different. And that's why we needed that V to be firmly set flat in the spoon so that it doesn't, if it's ripply, it wouldn't have stuck. Glue is only going to attach in those two places. So just support the shape while you're doing this. And if you're watching and you want to do this bit while you're just watching me paint glue, then go ahead. Okay, I'm just going to quickly do these as well. The glue, it's fine if you paint the glue on in advance. You could leave it there for about 3 or 4 minutes. All that's going to happen is that when you go back to your first one, it's going to be super tacky rather than slippery, and it will hold on to your shape almost immediately. The thing you've got to be careful there is if you need to adjust it in any way, it may restrict you. Okay, so I've just painted all 10 petals, proper V from here to the point, from the point up to here. Okay, proper V. So bearing in mind I've got 2 different sizes here, I'm just going to move the larger ones out of the way so I don't make a mistake and attach those. And I'm going to bring my flower into play and move these supports, but have them nearby because you're going to need them for the next bit. So the idea here is you pick up the first petal that you've glued. The pointy end is going to be lined up at the base of the flower. And remember what we were doing before, we want to offset them. So the join here is going to go in the middle of the new petal. So take the point to the stick in the center. Press on both sides. This is why it needs to have a bit of flexibility, because you need to make contact with the center that you've made already. Wait a few seconds and then put a tissue piece in, okay, so that that stays on. And then you go to your next one and you're overlapping, spacing it evenly as you go around. So just have a look at the flower, see where the next one needs to go, and try and space these evenly. So first of all, the point, the bottom of the point, the tip has got glue on it. So press that firmly. Don't press all the way around here. You want to keep it nice and rounded. Press on here with one finger and at the same time on the other side with one finger. So it's only the area where you're glued that you're pressing. Okay, now to start with, when you add these, they're going to all look a bit closed up, but when we've got all of the petals on, then we can actually just take a look and decide where we want to open up. Now this one, interestingly, makes my flower look a little bit large. So if your petals are coming up here and you don't want them that big, do you remember I was saying to you that you might need to shorten it at the tip end, especially Tracy, yours are quite long. So if you feel like they're lifting too far, all you need to do is take a little bit or more off the bottom edge. So you trim it from the bottom, you shorten the petal by trimming at the bottom. So now this one can go in, and you'll notice that I can't press in here because it's nice and curled and it's kind of pushing it out of the way. Obviously, when you do yours, you're going to have it set on the surface so your pieces of support won't fall out. And as they fall out, just pop them back in. It's just a patience game, this one. Okay, so then we take the next one, pop that in. Again, press at the bottom, right at the point at the bottom, few seconds, and then transfer your pressure to the sides where you know you've put your glue. Drop a support in, and then your last one on that layer. So that should be all the same size times 5 stuck on. Okay, so pressing. I have gone up a little bit on here because I want to open this out in a minute. So of course, if I open it out, it becomes more horizontal. And if you haven't got your height in the first place, it's going to look a bit funny. So in a minute, I'm going to pull these back. But for the moment, I want to leave them where they are. Then I bring my next set in. So I'm just going to be, I know it's 12 o'clock now, but we've gone through everything, including the assembly of the piece onto the cake. So if you need to go, I understand, but I'll just sticking these on in the same way. Okay, so a slight overlap. If you feel brave enough not to put the support in, that's fine. Once you've got those final layers in, I think I put cocktail sticks on the list, but the final layer, because I'm not going to add any more, if I find the middle of that petal and just poke in my stick so that it finds maybe one of the kinks in the center of the fresh petal I've just put on, and that will be enough to hold it on now. And of course, as I go around, if I do that, then this bit here is not in my way of putting the next petal on. So again, tip right down to the bottom where the central stick is, holding on right at the bottom there, and then transfer your pressure to the side where you know you've got your glue. Add in a cocktail stick. So this I'm just going to move out of the way because they've stuck quite efficiently. So last couple going in, tip as far down to the bottom as you can, press the bottom tip, transfer your pressure, and of course these have a chance for the glue to go tacky, so they're holding quite nicely. And just before it falls off, just pop in a cocktail stick. And those cocktail sticks, if you want, you could leave those in instead of your folded piece of kitchen towel. And I never throw the kitchen towel away. Store it in a bag and you can use it for supporting something else. So pressing at the bottom and then come to the sides. But you can see, because I haven't pressed in the middle, I've got petals that are opening on me. So the very, very, very last bit is to decide just how open you want this peony. So if I want it a bit more open, all I need to do is just turn the slant of my cocktail sticks more open, making sure I've got support where I need it. Okay, so you can add a couple more in. And then if you open out, while your petals are still a bit on the wet side, if you open that out, you end up with a beautiful peony. And that, if I had the last set of 5 that I made, if I made another 5, so 15 in total on spoons, that extra spare 5 I wouldn't put on until I assemble it on the cake, and then that would hide any side profile that you've got and make it look spectacular. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed the lesson. Okay, so there's our finished peony, and yeah, enjoy. I'll look forward to seeing you again soon. Bye for now.